Thailand's President Mugabe meets the war veterans behind the land protest. But a court tells their leader, end your occupation of white-owned farms. Philippines air crash investigations begin after 131 people die. Police say they have a new lead in the hunt for Jill Dando's killer. And why you really can be too kind to your pet this Easter. Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Leaders of the so-called war veterans in Zimbabwe who are violently seizing the land of white farmers are meeting for talks with President Mugabe. This morning, the war veterans leader was found guilty of contempt of court for inciting land occupations after they'd been declared illegal. Our Southern Africa correspondent Jane Stanley is in Zimbabwe capital Harare. Jane.
After the killing of a second white farmer yesterday, these talks are vital. Hundreds of terrified white farming families have now moved off their land, damaging the leading sector of Zimbabwe's economy. All sides in this dispute are finally meeting face to face. White farmers and the war veterans who are squatting on their land at the home of their president, Robert Mugabe. These crucial talks started only minutes after the veterans' leader, Tendai Hunsvi, was brought to court by the farmers. He was ordered to comply with a previous ruling to remove his supporters from 1,000 farms. But Mr. Hunsvi showed contempt for the judge.
He was led like a sheep to the slaughter.
An ominous note of apparent defiance. It means more worry and little comfort for farmers living down these empty dirt tracks off one of the main roads leading to Harare. Nearby farms have been burned. It's quiet but eerie. Mark Hutchins had armed men at his gate yesterday and a written death threat. Men saying they were war veterans gave it to his workers. If you don't do that, you're dead from the war vet.
And as I say, it puts a different light on things than as far as people have been killed. So you probably wouldn't have taken too much cognizance of that before, but at the moment it is a worrying threat to get here. The price to pay, as I said. How many deaths? I don't know. It would have to be a lot because I love farming in this country and I love this country. And farming is my life. It would take a lot.
Mark has sent his wife and 3 young boys to Harare. He's not the only farmer to have been targeted here. The capital may be only 45 minutes away, but at least it's safer there. Now, some Zimbabweans, both black and white, are now saying that President Mugabe has started a fire, one that he may find difficult to put out, and they fear for their future. Anna.
Jane, what's going on at the land talks this morning?
Well, there's some confusion and it doesn't look like it's going too well. After their arrival, one of the white farmers' representatives came out, said he'd been told to leave, and another indicated that though he was still inside, he was not meeting President Mugabe. But they have been given some reassurance that they will be allowed to meet the 3 parties involved all together later on. So everyone here very much holding their breath because this is such an essential meeting given the escalation of violence in the past few days.
Jane, thank you very much. So, is the international pressure for an end to the violence having any effect on President Mugabe? And why has land reform become such an issue now, 20 years after independence? Our diplomatic correspondent, Brian Hanrahan, is with me. Brian, how can we judge this situation? Is it one in which we just have to sit back and watch what's going on in Zimbabwe, or can the world intervene?
Well, nobody has any formal power to intervene. It is an internal matter for Zimbabwe. The only body which has armed itself with the right, if you like, to make moral pronouncements on this is the Commonwealth, because of the Harare Declaration, which says good government is something that all its members must do. But it has no mechanism to enforce this. There'll be a meeting of Commonwealth ministers in about a fortnight, but it's very slow, very cumbersome. What the British are now doing is pushing to get other influential African leaders, the kind of people that Mugabe might listen to talk to him. Thabo Mbeki is going to Zimbabwe in the next couple of weeks. They hope he'll say something. And we had Kofi Annan talking about calling for a restraint. That's the kind of people he might listen to, and that's certainly what Robin Cook thinks is the right way forward.
I'm encouraged by the outcome. We appear to have got an agreement from President Mugabe to return to dialogue, and I'm glad we now have a date when his delegation will come to London for talks. We've always made it clear we're willing to help fund a program of land reform, but it has got to be one within the rule of law, and it's got to help the real rural poor, and there must be a stop to illegal occupations which have brought this violence and deaths.
Zimbabwe's been independent for 20 years. Why has so little been done about land reform? What's been the problem?
Well, quite a lot has been done, but it happens very slowly. I was looking at the figures. About 43% of the land was in the hands of white farmers' independence. That dropped over the next 15 years to about 30%. And a lot of it did go to families, and they did a lot better as a result of it. But it was slow, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, all the rules started to change. It became arguments about corruption. There were suggestions that Robert Mugabe wanted to increase the speed of it all. He wanted the lands taken away and handed over to somebody else much more quickly. And a lot of it turned up in the hands of his ministers and indeed their relatives, and the whole thing started to go wrong. And people said this was a political tactic. He wasn't actually seriously interested in land reform anymore. He was trying to take political advantage for it the last election. That's certainly what Morgan Tsvangirai, who is the opposition leader now, the Movement for Democratic Change leader, he's in London. He thinks it's a tactic which is being repeated for the next election.
This has nothing to do with the national issue. This is a personal issue. It is personal survival. The target is the MDC, and these white farmers are supporters of MDC. So the real strategy is to destroy the opposition before the elections. And whatever he's going to do, he's crazy and deranged about that particular position.
So what effect will this have on next month's elections, do you think?
Well, there's obviously a hope by Mr. Mugabe that it'll play very well in his terms. You've got to remember, 100 years ago, all the land was owned by blacks. And by 20 or 30 years later, 40% of it, 50% of it was in the hands of the whites. And that is a really strong issue still in memory there. But a lot of people think that Mugabe's position is now so weak he couldn't win the elections even using this. And they wonder if that, because there's rampant inflation, the economy is falling apart, they can't get enough food, they can't get enough fuel to cook with. I mean, people are really unhappy. And so they wonder if this is being whipped up into a false crisis in order to try and postpone the elections. That is what the opposition suspect is going on.
Brian, thanks very much indeed. Within the last few minutes, the jury at the trial of a Norfolk farmer who shot 2 intruders have returned verdicts on 2 of the charges against him. Richard Bilton is at Norwich Crown Court and has the latest on the case. Richard, what went on in court this morning?
Well, Anna, about half an hour ago, the jury returned to the courtroom. They'd been considering their verdicts for about a day by that stage. Tony Martin faces 4 charges after shooting the burglars who broke into his remote farmhouse last August. On the primary charge of murdering 16-year-old Fred Barras, the jury said they hadn't agreed as yet on a verdict. On the secondary charge of attempting to murder Brendan Fearon, who was the other man who broke into the house and was badly injured, they said not guilty. On the third charge of wounding with intent, again not agreed as yet on a verdict. And on the fourth charge of possession of firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life, again a verdict of not guilty. Now there were some gasps in court when those verdicts were returned. Fred Barras' family have been in court throughout this trial. One woman said no, another said they can't do that. The clerk asked them to be quiet, and 2 women left. They said they hadn't got verdicts on the other 2 counts. They went out until 1 o'clock a few moments ago. The judge said to them he won't accept a verdict between 1 and 2, but he will accept now a majority verdict. Those 2 we've had so far were unanimous, but now we can have a majority verdict.
Richard, thanks. A plane has crashed in the Philippines, killing all 131 holidaymakers and crew on board. The Boeing 737 crashed into a hill on Samal Island as it approached the southern city of Davao. It had taken off from the capital, Manila, early this morning.
It is the Philippines' worst ever air disaster. The 737 had abandoned its first attempt to land because of another aircraft on the runway. There was also low visibility. The plane crashed into a hillside as it came round to try again. There were no survivors. Officials have already started an investigation.
It's indicated on the record that the pilot asked for another chance to approach the runway because of low cloud cover. Whether that is the cause or there's something else has yet to be determined.
One area that investigators will want to examine closely is the rudder. Earlier this week, US safety officials recommended design changes to the rudders of 737s because of a tiny chance that pilots could lose control.
What has happened in the past, it is believed, is that all of a sudden, completely uncommanded by the pilot, the rudder has gone in one or the other direction to the full extent of its travel and caused the aircraft, therefore, to swerve to one side. And in swerving to one side, it causes one wing to have more lift than the other.
And that can cause the plane to crash. But the 737 is the world's most popular passenger jet, with more than 3,000 in service worldwide and a generally very safe reputation. It's equally possible the crew simply lost their bearings in low cloud and flew too low over the island. Simon Montague, BBC News.
A 3-year-old girl has died after apparently swallowing the heroin substitute methadone. Natalia Mujahid and her 1-year-old brother fell ill at their home in Lancashire early yesterday morning. A 27-year-old man and a 24-year-old woman are being questioned by the police.
When police and paramedics were called to this house in a predominantly Asian area of Blackburn, they found 2 small children seriously unwell, experiencing breathing difficulties. It was established that both children were suffering from an overdose of drugs, thought to be either an opiate or a heroin substitute such as methadone. They were taken to a children's hospital in Manchester, where late last night, 3-year-old Natalia Mujahid died. Her 1-year-old brother Darnish is still in intensive care. A man and a woman, both in their 20s, thought to be the children's parents, are being held by the police. A decade ago, drug abuse among Britain's Asian population was much less common than in other sections of the community. But now that's changed. For example, in Lancashire in the last 6 years, there's been a 4-fold increase in the number of arrests of Asian men on drugs offences. This drugs project in Manchester has been targeting Asian families with advice.
Most of the drug use amongst young Asians is recreational use of drugs like cannabis. And whilst there are problems with that, it's not major problems we're overly concerned about. It's really the problems with heroin use, which we're starting to see amongst some, particularly young Muslims, that is a great concern to agencies like Lifeline.
Following the death of Natalia Mujahid, doctors here are now trying to save the life of her 1-year-old brother Darnish. His condition is still said to be critical. It's thought detectives will begin questioning the children's parents later today. Kevin McKay, BBC News, Manchester.
Railtrack and Thames Trains are making legal claims against each other over the Paddington rail crash. Railtrack's case places responsibility on the Thames Trains driver, Michael Hodder, who was one of the 31 people who died. A report by the Health and Safety Executive said last week that Mr. Hodder may have misinterpreted rather than missed a red signal moments before the collision. Just over 2 weeks to go, and the race amongst the main party candidates to beat off Ken Livingstone for the job of London Mayor is hotting up. As part of our series on this controversial election, our political correspondent John Pienaar went out on the campaign trail with the Conservative candidate Stephen Norris.
This is an opportunity for Londoners.
He's a salesman to his fingertips, and just now Stephen Norris is selling himself to a lot of people who don't normally buy the idea of voting Tory.
An inclusive city where every single Londoner feels that they are a part of a community.
This meeting was about reaching ethnic minorities, voters who are often sceptical about politicians, and Conservative politicians in particular. Many voters feel the same way. The Norris image is socially liberal, but hard-headed and politically independent. As his team puts it, not an identikit Conservative.
For the first time in our history, you're not voting for the party, you're voting for an individual. So, yeah, you're an individual with your own likes and dislikes, and I suspect, like every single member of Parliament in all the political parties, there are a huge number of the things you agree with your party about and the odd things you don't agree with.
But will that kind of independence count for much against someone like Ken Livingstone?
It may be that victory is out of reach for Stephen Norris, but if the polls are right, he could be heading for a good result. If he does well, it'll be seen as vindication for his approach in defying the conventional image of Conservatives and conservatism. He still has a fight on his hands, but he had to fight hard just to win the Tory nomination in the first place.
Stephen Norris was initially beaten to the nomination by Geoffrey Archer, before Lord Archer was forced to stand down in disgrace. Even then, a Tory selection committee tried hard to veto him. But so far he's still smiling, more broadly than ever since his recent marriage. What he calls his tabloid form, headlines about a series of former mistresses, doesn't seem to have held him back. At this meeting in the city, he seemed to be on home territory. With corporate big hitters like these, Stephen Norris has a lot of credibility. That doesn't mean the business lobby is signed up to his campaign.
They've got to make a judgment as to whether they are going to
cuddle up to somebody who may or may not win, or whether they're going to have to keep their options open. I think in practice, they're all going to be keeping their options open, where many of them would privately like to be able simply to go with Steve Norris.
Maybe so, but he's a natural politician and a born salesman. And just now, Stephen Norris is selling very hard.
Very good. Hello.
John Pienaar, BBC News.
Altogether, there are 11 candidates standing in the London mayoral election, which is on May the 4th. And the time is 16 minutes past 1, and later in the programme, police in Leeds appeal for calm as fans prepare for the arrival of the Galatasaray team. And killing pets with kindness, don't give Easter eggs to your dog. Police investigating the murder of Jill Dando will make another appeal for information on tonight's Crime Watch programme, almost a year after the TV presenter was shot dead outside her home. Detectives are now working on the theory that a key suspect was seen in the area several times in the days leading up to her murder. Our crime correspondent Stephen Cape is at New Scotland Yard. Stephen.
There are so many unanswered questions about the death of Jill Dando. Was it a contract killing? Was it the work of a lone stalker? Now detectives are hoping this new evidence will bring them a step closer to catching the murderer. A workman walking down this street near Jill Dando's home first spotted a suspicious figure standing next to this nursery. Again, the same man dressed in an ill-fitting suit and trilby was spotted on the corner of other streets in the area. Other witnesses saw a similar suspect near the TV presenter's home on the morning she was killed. At a Scotland Yard news conference, the officer heading the investigation said he hoped this latest evidence would be the crucial breakthrough the inquiry desperately needed.
12 different people saw that man, and I do think that is one individual. That's not 12 individuals in Gowan Avenue in the 2 hours before her death. That's one person. His failure to come forward, it's a strong possibility he is the person who shot Miss Dando.
Tonight on the BBC Crime Watch programme, there'll be a fresh appeal for information showing an actor playing the part of a man, sometimes in a trilby, sometimes in oversized glasses, wearing an ill-fitting suit, who became agitated about being recognised, who was also seen using a mobile phone. Detectives have also revealed that a woman with the same surname as Jill Dando was called by a man asking for details about the TV presenter. The caller was polite but persistent. The woman had no connection with the Dando family. This was the latest in a series of bizarre attempts to get into the life of Jill Dando. Detectives said the killer could be a loner, divorced, with an interest in handguns, whose obsession turned to hate. Bizarre indeed. If I tell you there are 1,354 Dandos on the electoral register, 38 of them in London, and so some character decided to leaf through the phone book looking for a J. Dando to have a conversation about somebody he didn't know but wanted to find out details about the TV presenter. Anna.
Stephen, police theories about Jill's killer have changed over the past year. How hopeful are they now that they're on the right track?
All they can be is hopeful at this stage. You're absolutely right. It wasn't that long ago they were talking about the possibility of a contract killing. Now they're talking about a lone, obsessed stalker. They're hoping that this is the right track, and indeed the profiler on the case has always believed that it was a single person who was operating, but certainly somebody who planned the event, somebody who went to these streets in a few days beforehand, looking, watching and waiting. And the police are absolutely sure there are people out there who saw him, who can perhaps give even more information about the movements of this person.
Stephen, thank you very much. A bomb has killed a female employee of McDonald's at one of their restaurants in France. The explosion occurred in the village of Quevert, just outside Dinan in northern Brittany. Police refuse to speculate on the motive for the attack, but terrorism experts have been sent to the scene. Unemployment is continuing to fall. Government figures out today show the number of people looking for work fell by 25,000 over the last quarter to 1.7 million. But the news comes as a Commons report is published saying the north of England is still losing out in the jobs market. Our political correspondent CAROLYN QUINN is at Westminster. CAROLYN, this report really flies in the face of everything that Tony Blair has told us. There is no north-south divide. It's rather embarrassing for them, isn't it?
Well, the report is basically saying that there is a north-south divide, that there are not enough jobs available in areas of high unemployment like the north the North East, the North West, Humberside, and the former coalfield communities, of course some inner city areas in London as well. And they're saying that the job search is hampered by things like lack of transport facilities, childcare facilities, and the fact that the jobs available are not necessarily matched to the skills that the people in these areas have. They're also questioning the government use of figures. They say that where the government says there are 1 million claimants and 1 million jobs, therefore everybody should, in theory, have a job against their name. It's not as easy as that. And they say that sometimes the government does have a tendency to pick and choose figures, just depending on the picture that it really does want to convey. So criticism from the government there for the government.
So what sort of reaction are we going to expect from the government on this?
Well, the government, of course, say that they've never said blatantly there is not a north-south divide. They recognise that there are differences between the north and south, but disparities within regions are the key thing. I think they'll welcome the fact that the committee said that they're doing good things with the New Deal, but essentially the committee's main message is you need to do more, you need to help unemployment in the north-east and the north-west, and really the full aim of employment is what they should be striving for. The government still needs to do more.
Caroline, thank you. Disabled people still face prejudice despite laws aimed at protecting them. Now they have a new commission to tackle discrimination in the workplace and in their day-to-day lives. The commission aims to work with companies, but it does have the power to bring prosecutions.
For many years, Nicholas Kirker worked as a chemist for British Sugar, despite his deteriorating eyesight. It was only when they decided to restructure that he was made redundant, despite his experience. He took them to a tribunal, where his claim that he'd been discriminated against because of poor eyesight was accepted. With damages of well over £100,000, he's one of the relatively few people to have got redress from the Disability Discrimination Act.
I think for the DDA to be effective, certainly there has to be a lot more support to people who are prepared to take cases. There are quite a few disabled people who understandably are reluctant to take cases, but I think it's helpful if there is a commission or something that can support them and fund them through that process.
The new commissioners held a press conference this morning. They'll be expected to provide the muscle to test the law. They have powers to investigate, arbitrate, and where persuasion has failed, to take companies and organisations to court. But they also have to carry with them small employers worried about more regulation and expense.
There is no room for the sort of discrimination whereby somebody who has got cancer is sacked from an oil company because of their cancer. Somebody who has a visual impairment is chosen for redundancy for no other reason than they have their visual impairment. That's what this is about.
The expectations of disabled people have been raised by anti-discrimination legislation and the reassurances of government. But for ordinary disabled people, everyday life is still fraught with practical difficulties. It'll be the challenge of the Disability Rights Commission to put this right. Peter White, BBC News.
As many as 9 people are believed to have been hurt in an RAF helicopter crash in North Yorkshire. Police say the accident happened at about 12:20 in the Hipswell Moor area near Catterick. It's been confirmed that the aircraft involved was an RAF Puma. West Yorkshire Police have appealed to Leeds United fans to keep calm and not retaliate for the deaths of 2 of the club's supporters in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. The players from the Turkish club Galatasaray will arrive in Leeds this afternoon ahead of tomorrow's second leg of their UEFA Cup semi-final. A big security operation is planned. Our North of England correspondent Richard Wells joins me from Elland Road. Richard, the police this morning have called for Leeds fans to show the better side of British football. Is there a willingness in Leeds to behave well?
The eyes of European football will be on Leeds over the next 48 hours. And there's still a lot of anger and bitterness here. But yes, I think the majority of fans will heed the warnings that have come from the police and also from the widow of one of those who died. But there are fears. There are fears from the rogue element, not just in Leeds but elsewhere in the country, who might use the feelings here to exact their own form of violence, if you like. It's all quiet at the moment. What's been happening here this morning is the removal of the tributes that have been paid here over the last fortnight to those who died. There have been literally thousands of bouquets of flowers, shirts and scarves laid here at the Billy Bremner Memorial. And today the club took the decision, with the funerals of the 2 who died over, it's now right to move on, and these tributes are being withdrawn.
Are the police confident, Richard, that they can protect the Galatasaray players, some of whom say they've had death threats?
They are, yes. They're not giving exact details of what they plan to do, but the team and the 80 VIPs who are allowed into the game tomorrow night will be coming into Leeds this afternoon. The team will come then to have a training session, but they'll be guarded throughout and will be guarded up to 7:30 in the start of the game tomorrow. Anna.
Richard, thank you for that. A man's been shot dead by police investigating a domestic disturbance in Newton Abbey near Belfast. The RUC say the shot was fired during a struggle after the man attacked an officer. The police have promised a full and rigorous investigation.
It was in the early hours in Newton Abbey that 2 RUC officers were called to this cottage to investigate a domestic dispute. By the officer's own account, James Cornhill, armed with a knife, hammer and a wrench, struck out twice at one officer before he was shot dead.
It's a tragedy for everybody. My sympathy goes to the family and the girlfriend of this man. But I have to say that it's tremendous trauma for the individual concerned and a tremendous trauma for his colleagues.
One of the officers was treated in hospital for head injuries but has been released. Police are still at the house gathering evidence as local politicians question the need to have used firearms at all.
There has to be a full and transparent investigation, because if it is proved that the RUC officers were overzealous, then there can be no justification. But at the same time, I have to say that the RUC, if they hadn't been armed, it could actually have been one of them who were fatally wounded. So it's a complex situation,
which the Independent Police Complaints Commission is now handling. It is a feature of policing in Northern Ireland that officers on patrol carry a gun. An internal police inquiry is already underway to establish why, on this occasion, the gun was fired. David Eads, BBC News, Newton Abbey.
Well, it's said that you can kill with kindness, and in the case of pets, it could turn out to be a real danger. Dog owners are being warned not to give Easter eggs to their pets because they contain a chemical which is harmless to humans but potentially fatal to animals. The National Canine Defence League is urging people to buy special chocolate drops from pet food shops instead.
Very good, very, very good.
These dog owners have already started learning how to train and look after their pets, but they're not just struggling with the basic techniques. They're also learning how to keep their dogs healthy, which is why they won't be tempted to buy their pets any chocolate eggs this Easter.
I wouldn't buy an Easter egg because she'll get sick and then she'll be ill for like 2 days.
And I want to risk it, take her to the vet and stuff like that.
When I bought Kia, the breeder actually said very strongly, don't give your dog chocolate, because it knew of a golden retriever that had died as a result of having chocolate.
For dogs, chocolate can prove fatal because it contains theobromine. It's a substance that's harmless to humans, but vets warn it acts as a poison in some animals. They say dogs are most at risk from dark chocolate and cocoa powder.
Dogs quite like the taste of chocolate, so when they've had it once, they'll sort of just tend to sort of carry on sort of rummaging through things just to find more and more chocolate. So it's sort of almost like an accidental overdose, I think, in lots of cases.
It's the chocolate that you like, is it?
The National Canine Defence League says if people want to treat their dogs this Easter, they should buy them chocolate specifically made for pets and stay away from traditional Easter eggs.
This hollow dark chocolate egg weighs 160 grams and contains just 1.5 grams of theobromine, but it's still enough to kill this Jack Russell and any dog up to the size of a Labrador. But vets say if people can act quickly enough, it is possible to save their dogs if they get them to the practice in time. Karen Bauman, BBC News.
And at 28 minutes past 1, the main news again. War veterans leaders behind the violent land protests in Zimbabwe are meeting President Mugabe. The talks come after the veterans were ordered by a judge to call off their occupation of white-owned farms. You can find out the latest on the situation in Zimbabwe throughout the afternoon on BBC News 24. But that's all this Wednesday lunchtime from the BBC News at 1. Good afternoon.
On Westminster Live this afternoon with Diana Medill, live coverage of Prime Minister's questions and